Okay, in a previous video, now I did upload it on a Sunday, and people don't watch videos that much on Sundays, but it's not that bad. And I think in my previous video, I had a commenter say that it went over the viewers' heads. I don't think it went over the viewers' heads. I think the viewers watched the video, proper nouns, and said, okay, so you're saying that immigrant groups can actually be broken down into multiple groups. Okay, nobody denies that, so what? What are you trying to say? And so what I said in that video, it seems trivial. And of course, people who call themselves left-wing, globalist, internationalist, anti-racist, anti-religious, those kinds of people, of course they are aware that Indian immigrants, African immigrants, East African, and they could probably even are even smart enough to recognize differences between East, West, and South Africans and Bushmen and Pygmies, and then those are the five sub-racial groups or racial groups, depending on how you define race. Anyway, they can identify differences between immigrant groups. They don't see them as all the same in a narrow technical sense, but I would say that with them, the ideological category of immigrant minority overrides the specific characteristics of these groups, right? And the example I thought of is the racial identity groups in blacks and mestizos in the U.S. Blacks, for example, you have all the various black-only organizations. Libertarian realists talked a lot about this. United Negro College Fund, Congressional Black Caucus, Association of Black Lawyers, Association of Black Cardiologists, which he thought was funny because there are like 100 of them or something. Association, whatever. You can find a whole laundry list of black-only professional organizations and some lower-level black identity organizations, and not to mention the explicit black identity that doesn't go around parading in the form of an explicit racial organization, but, for example, black voters saying, how is this politician or this rule going to help my people? Right? They come out and say, my people, black people. Right? And so when you recognize that, racial nationalism, doesn't have to wear a hood, then you see it as far more prevalent than normally. And there's a problem, though. And this is a good example because what prevents, quote-unquote, left-wingers from seeing this is the ideological category overwhelming what's actually there, right? The improper noun overriding the proper noun, right? Of immigrant minority or oppressed minority, that ideological category is overriding the reality, which is black people. Okay. And so they look at, and so when you present them all of these black these explicitly racial identity and racial advocacy groups, they see that as a response to oppression. They don't see that as a form of nationalism, as a form of racial nationalism. They see that as a form of response to oppression, that they were attacked and targeted as a collective, and so they respond and react as a collective. And so that is fine and that is fair. That is not an expression of racial nationalism. It is an expression of just wanting fairness on an individual, for them as individuals. And so in the ideological prism, that's what they see. They see blacks as, they look different, but that's kind of, trivial stuff. What matters is their social category as having been slaves and as having, been under Jim Crow, plus various other less formal forms of oppression, a la Tim Wise's theories. And so they don't see it as black nationalism. They see it as the little guy. That's what they see it as. They see it as a little guy who's been unfairly treated reacting to the unfair treatment. And perhaps finding some solidarity with a fellow men who are down at the bottom being treated unfairly. That's how they see it. Right? They don't see, and so because of this ideological prism, to which they're, to which in my mind's eye, this idea is 20% true, right? And I mean, I'm just giving you my what does that even mean? 20% true? Well, that's I can't even describe that. But in my mind's eye, all these black nationalist groups, it's 20% of response to perceived injustices, and note the term perceived, not necessarily real, though it could be real. And 80% is just a result of black identity, black racial identity. And black racial identity gets a free pass because it gets to be masked with this ideological term, with the ideological story of oppression. So, and you see the same thing happening with mestizo immigrants from Mexico and other mixed Native American countries. So that's what I mean by proper nouns. If we go over to Europe, if we go over to the United Kingdom and we look at the bringing in of Muslim immigrants and African immigrants, what you'll notice is that the opponents of these immigrant groups, and they'll say that they're not really opponents and that they just want them to integrate or have limitations, blah, 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 blah. They don't like these groups. And the reason they don't like these groups is because they're treating these groups not as an ideological category, but as a proper noun. They're treating them as a proper noun, not an improper noun. They're treating them as Muslims who want to come in and they're taking over little areas and they want to make everyone else live under Sharia. Right? About half of them do right now, and the later generations actually get more pro-Sharia over time. And also, the blacks, the African immigrants, they all vote socialist, and it appears that they're doing so. It could be, an individual, mentality like, well, I'm kind of poor and I want some good stuff for me, so I'm going to vote for that. Maybe there's some of that, but when we look at the explicit black racial identity in the United States, I'm not quite so sure to what degree it exists in the United Kingdom. We see them voting that way out of a racial loyalty pact, right? And we see black conservatives. It's not so much that they're said to be betraying their race, right? It's not a betrayal of the oppressed groups of people, right? It's not the betrayal of an oppressed category. Right? No, what black people say about Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams is that they are betraying their race, right? Not class, race. Now, white liberals, white quote-unquote leftists, they look at Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams as betraying their class and, in a roundabout way, betraying their race, but only in so much as their race is effectively a class. See? And that's what I mean. And I'm having trouble formulating this thought into words, this seeing things in terms of proper nouns as opposed to improper nouns, seeing things as specifically what they are as opposed to, an ideologically preconceived category. So there you go.